Welcome to the Absolute Beginner's Roadmap for the updated OSCP. I've been really excited to make this video, and shout out to you guys in the comments section, really spurring me on to create a new video now that this has been updated with the changes, right? Adding Active Directory in, some pretty big changes happening for the OSCP exams, especially. Now it's more in line with what the course is. Let's get right into it. This is going to be a master guide for obtaining OSCP, no matter what level you're at currently. Certainly, if you're an absolute beginner, we'll be talking roadmaps as well. So I have a number of resources up this time. This is going to be the best iteration of this guide. So if you've seen any of the previous ones, or if you haven't, this is going to be the one to watch. So the Pen 200, that's what this is known as. From OffSec, they have like a acronym and number system for all their certifications. This is a 200 level cert, meaning that it's like in their intermediate section, I'll say, right? There's 300s, and there's even I think like one or two 400s. Those are the most difficult certifications they offer. So that's where it sits on the totem pole. A pretty good place to get started for most people, I would say, though it is pretty difficult, right? So here is some information that they provided, right? Now, here's something that's new. I really wanted to bring this one up. We'll dive into the syllabus in just a little bit, but this is a new package. These are new packages that they started to offer now, which I really love that they're doing this, right? Because the way that a lot of the certification companies get money is they require you to pay them a fee every single year just to maintain the cert. So you might work really hard to get that certification, and then you don't even get to show it off unless you pay a subscription fee. Instead, what Offensive Security decided to do is offer this subscription if you want to have some perks while you're going for the certs, but you can always just buy them standalone as you do now. And there's, as of right now at least, I am very happy to say that you don't need to pay the money to maintain to have the certification, right? If you get OSCP or any other cert they offer, that is yours pretty much forever, right? And you don't have to pay any fee to maintain it. Now, with that being said, don't write these off. These are some really cool packages that OffSec has put together so that you have these Learn subscriptions. So you have Learn 1 and you have Learn Unlimited. And here's what these are, right? $24.99 for Learn 1 and $54.99 for Learn Unlimited. Let's just dive into this a little bit more, right? So basically what you're able to do is, once I get through some of the marketing here, they have these two packages here, right? So Learn 1, an entire year of lab access plus 2 exam attempts for one course of your choosing. So here are the eligible courses for that. So this is the OSCP here, this first one. The second one is the OSEP. This is the OSWA, which is a new certification they're coming out with. They don't even have the exam up for that one quite yet. This is the OSWE. This is the binary exploitation one. I forget what it's called. The OSED, I believe. And I think this was like the Mac OS bypasses one. And then this is like the blue team, like security analyst one, SOC analyst. And so what's cool is you can pick one of these. So say you pick OSCP, you get access to the lab for an entire year. So you don't have to worry about re-upping the labs constantly, and you get 2 exam attempts included in this. So pretty good deal if you're brand new, I would say. Because here's the thing, if you aren't new, you're going to pay $1,300 or for about $1,400 for like 3 months for only 3 months of lab access, right? And if you can pass the exam like on your first attempt or so, then you'd make it worth it. But if you're going to have to extend out that lab time a bit more and pay for more exam attempts, I think they're like $200 each, then you may as well have went with the Learn 1. And you even get the new Pen 210 wireless course, which is an update of the old Pen 210. But yeah, there's a wireless pen testing course that you have access to as well. And yeah, retakes are $249. So I think this is like the standard price for a retake. And they all have different cooling off periods too as well, something important to note. So let's just go ahead and take a look at the cooldowns, right? So what is the retake policy? Here's where this stuff gets a little bit interesting, right? So if you don't have any of these packages after the first failed attempt, you have to wait 6 weeks to reschedule your exam. So that would be a month and a half, right? If you fail it a second time, you got to wait 8 weeks. So you got to wait 2 months. And if you fail it a third time, you actually have to wait 12 weeks. So that would be a full 3 months that you would have to wait. You'll be on cooldown till you can reattempt the exam, right? Now, if we take a look at if you have the Learn 1 subscription, it's a little bit more generous, but only for the first attempt. So after the first attempt, you could take it a month later rather than 6 weeks. So you save yourself 2 weeks. But then these two are the same. I think if you're a complete beginner, Learn 1 is useful because, you know, especially if you're not super confident that you're going to pass it on your first try, which most people don't, then I think you can make this, this would be value for you. But if you already have a lot of experience coming in, it might not be. You might be able to do it with less money than $24.99 to get OSCP. But what's really huge value is this Learn Unlimited. And I would say if you work for a pretty good company, you can get them to pay for this. That's super clutch, like insanely clutch, because you literally get all of these courses for free. Well, not for free, but included, right? It pretty much comes with every single offset course. So the way this looks is you go into your dashboard on the Offensive Security website, and you instantly have access to all the certifications. You have all of the PDFs just right there in the dashboard. You have unlimited lab time to all of the certifications, so you can jump into any one at any time. Now, with that being said, don't get too distracted. Be focused on one at a time. But you automatically have access to everything. You can work on any lab you want. And you have unlimited. Here, let's just keep scrolling down, right? For a year, you have all of this, right? And both of them, by the way, they come with the Offensive Security Proving Grounds for an entire year as well. And you'll get all these new 100 level courses. That's something I didn't mention. But you have unlimited exam attempts for all of these certifications. And to top it off, you have you still have like the wireless pen testing course with unlimited attempts. And here's another huge kicker, right? You have free of charge exam attempts, right? So you basically have all of this stuff. And if we go back over here, if you have Learn Unlimited, instead of 6 weeks or 4 weeks after your first failed attempt, it's only 2 weeks. So you can literally take the exam, retake it 2 weeks later. And after that, the second attempt or any subsequent attempt is only 4 weeks, which is like hugely, like that's a huge benefit over, like if you have Learn 1, it's still the same as if you didn't have anything. You have to wait 12 weeks from the third attempt and onward, right? There's a full 12 weeks from the previous exam. That's 3 months. So instead of 3 months, you could literally take the OSCP every single month if you have this package, like every single month. I'd say this is the best value. Obviously, not everyone's going to be able to afford it at this price point. I would say best case, if you could get your employer to pay for this, then, I mean, this is like the cost of like a SANS cert, but here's the thing. You're not getting just one cert. You're getting as many as you can pass, basically, in this time frame. And the fact that you can take exams every single month, I mean, you may as well just take an exam every month, right? You could really make a lot of progress through this list here. So that's what I would say to do. Pretty crazy that they're even offering this. It's really good. Really good value, insane value. So I had to start off the video mentioning that. I want to bring that to everyone's attention. So with that being said, let's get more into the actual, you know, what's on the OSCP, right? Something that a lot of people probably have been wondering. So let's just go back to it. Let's go into the info, right? Obviously, we talked about this before, how there's new exam machines and things like that. The exams changed. The labs were updated in 2020 as well. But what I really want to hone in on are the mindsets and the methodologies that you need in order to pass this stuff. I've been learning a lot on this over the years of making these roadmap videos. So let's just start with the syllabus, right? The details a lot of people probably want to know. This has greatly changed from the last time that I made this video, because I was covering like, okay, what can you ignore? What can't you ignore? I'll still stay on that topic, but there's a lot more that you're going to need to know for the exam than you did before. Let's just put it that way. So going through this, right, you want to be comfortable with Linux in general. You don't have to use Kali Linux. Here's the thing. Yes, the course is called Pen Testing with Kali Linux, but it's really up to you whether you use Kali Linux. You could even use Ubuntu. You can use anything you want. It doesn't really matter, any Linux distro. But I just prefer to use Kali because, I mean, everything's made to work with Kali on the course, so why not? With that being said, I don't use their VM. I decided not to use their VM, and I haven't had any issues whatsoever. So they always try to push you to use like their image, which is typically, it's a, what's it called? A VMware image, right? So you have to download VMware Player, and you can't take snapshots unless you have the paid version, the VMware Workstation, right? So if you don't have that and you don't have access to that and you use VirtualBox like I do, I would say just go ahead and use your own Kali distro. Now, with that being said, what I chose to do is I actually chose to use the same version of Kali Linux as them. So I think like what they're currently using is version 21.3 or something like that. So I just downloaded that version, and that way I was still using the same technology, same architecture and all of that stuff. But with that being said, it was I was still able to use VirtualBox, have my snapshots, not have to pay a licensing fee, anything like that. So, but anyways, you do want to be comfortable with Kali Linux. And you want to, with the command lines and tools and scripting, all that stuff is going to be really helpful. At least, if for nothing else, for the fact that you're going to need to know how to script stuff to fix the scripts and get your exploits working when they're not working, right? So passive information gathering, I mean, there could potentially be some OSINT involved, of course, but I haven't seen it in the exam attempts, and I haven't heard about anyone reporting that. So I wouldn't spend as much time here. I would be more focused on the active information gathering, things like running your Nmap scans, enumerating, how to enumerate all the different services you might encounter, how to gather information on the web server that's running. All this stuff is going to be important information that you're going to want to be really well versed in for sure. And then beyond that, I would say that the vulnerability scanning is not something you would need to learn, really know for the exam specifically. Now, it can be very helpful on the real-world pen testing stuff because vuln scanners, they can help you save some time. So if you're on a pen test or whatever, you get that running in the background, and that can find some of the lower findings in general, especially like things like missing security headers, right? I wouldn't waste my time doing that manually. I would just have a vuln scanner find that for me while I'm focused on finding the more critical vulnerabilities in the application. So that's what I would say for that. But for the exam, you're not allowed to use vuln scanners anyways, aside from Nikto. So other than learning how to run Nikto, I wouldn't really invest too much time in this. Web application attacks, this is going to be huge. You're going to encounter web servers, most likely, on the actual exam. So obviously this is a huge all-encompassing topic, but you basically want to be very comfortable with a wide assortment of exploits, vulnerabilities for web applications. And not only do you need to know a lot of that, but you also need to be familiar with a lot of the different CMSs and things like that you might encounter. It's going to help speed things along, right? If you're familiar with WordPress and what tools you can use to enumerate WordPress, like WP scan and things like that. Or if you know, like, okay, once I get access to the administrator dashboard on WordPress, this is how I can spawn a shell, right? Same thing for Drupal, right? Or any other piece of technology you might encounter a lot, like maybe like Webmin or different stuff like that, right? So just getting the experience through the labs, that's going to help you a lot with this. But then as far as the actual vulnerabilities, yeah, be familiar with stuff like XXE, LFI, RFI, SQL injection, manual SQL injection at that, right? Be familiar with all of these things because they could definitely come into play. It's a pretty high likelihood, I would say. What web application attacks that you could probably spend less time on would be the client-side ones. Most likely, you won't have to exploit another client on the network unless you're talking Active Directory, but I can't 100% confirm that. But if we're just talking web app attacks, right, you probably don't need to do any cross-site scripting, cross-site request forgery, or any of those super client-based attacks on the exam. Buffer overflows are still in, so they didn't go anywhere. So you're still going to get a buffer overflow box. It's just that it's not going to instantly give you root as soon as you exploit the vulnerability. So you're going to have to do privilege escalation after it, and they're no longer worth 25 points. Now they're worth just as many points as any other machine. So keep that in mind. And then you got your Windows buffer overflows. This is what you're going to, they say you could get either Windows or Linux. Personally, I will say this, take this with a grain of salt. I will say personally, I have only heard of people getting the Windows buffer overflows. Let me know in the comment section down below if you've ever gotten a Linux buffer overflow machine on the exam. But from my experience and from people I've talked to, it seems like it's been mostly Windows buffer overflow. So I would say spend more time here versus here, just personally from my own experience. So for the client-side attacks, I would actually pay attention here now. Why? Because Active Directory is in, and after doing some of the labs, without spoiling too much, let's just say that there may have been some client-side stuff involved on the Active Directory portion. So I would say that's definitely on the table that you could have, right? You could definitely encounter some client-side exploitation you need to do. So I would pay attention, and I really like the client-side stuff they cover in the 2020 update. So really good stuff. Locating public exploits and fixing them, absolutely. This is what you're going to need to do a ton on the exam. Pay close attention here. As you've noticed, we've gone more than halfway down this thing, and almost everything are things you need to pay attention to. So that is one of the big changes with the exam and the current iteration of it. It's a lot more applicable to what they teach you in the course, which is, I think, a really good improvement for the certification. File transfers, for sure. Antivirus evasion, that is on the table now. 100%, I will say that is now on the table. And the reason that this comes into play now is that there's the Active Directory boxes, right? I mean, there's even the Windows boxes before. Pay attention to the antivirus sections. Learn some basic technique. It's not going to be anything crazy. If there is probably you won't have to bypass Windows security. Let me just back up for a second there, right? That would probably be beyond the scope of the course, because even in the course when they showed you antivirus evasion, they were still keeping it pretty basic, and we were bypassing some third-party AV solutions. So I would surmise that most likely, if there's some kind of antivirus involved, it will be some third-party one that's a bit easier to bypass than the Windows security. So yeah, just using the techniques that they cover in the PDF, all the more reason to do the exercises, right? Privilege escalation, of course, that will be on there. You'll need to know both Windows and Linux. Password attacks. There could be brute forcing and stuff. I would think that most likely on the exam, they won't make it just a simple brute force. It'll probably be through exploiting something, but definitely good, something good to have in the background. There could be multiple vectors potentially to get in on the box. So you don't want to skimp out on this. You want to know how to do password attacks, and you want to make sure that you're covering that, you're implementing that. And then for the redirection and tunneling, I misspoke a bit in the last video that I did. I said, oh no, this is not going to be something you need to do. And let me really rephrase it. You're not going to need to pivot into other networks, but there are some techniques that you might need to use to, to actually access a certain service, right? For example, here's a technique for you. If you gain access to a system and you see, for example, MySQL is running on, but it's only accessible to localhost, right? Perhaps you could use one of these techniques to end up sharing that out to the entire network, opening that up to the entire network, so then you can interact from your Kali machine to that MySQL service, right? So that's where some of the redirection and tunneling could come to play on one of the boxes. So Active Directory attacks, obviously this is now in, so make sure you are aware of how to exploit Active Directory and what the common misconfigurations are and what the quirks are and how to exploit them, the different attacks, curb roasting, silver ticket, even some of the client-side stuff could potentially come into play. Now, I will say they have made the announcement that you're not allowed to use a lot of the features of Responder, basically. You're not allowed to do like LLMNR poisoning and NBTNS spoofing and all that stuff. You're not allowed to actually do that. So that does eliminate a lot of what we would commonly use Responder for. So I can't say for sure that Responder won't be useful, but just know that, yeah, there are certain restrictions on spoofing that you can't do. Same goes for the PWK as well. There's certain like spoofing and poisoning you can't do. And they'll tell you the ruling like once you sign up and everything. It might be available publicly. I wasn't able to find it. I think I did find it earlier. Maybe I can link that later. But yeah, another thing I'll say while we're on the topic of Active Directory attacks is what I've found is it's not really sufficient just to go off of the Active Directory machines you do on Hack the Box. And the reason for that is that most of those machines, you're going to be pen testing and attacking Active Directory from your Linux machine, whereas with a lot of the OSCP stuff, from what I've experienced, is that a lot of times you're going to be attacking them from a Windows machine. So you're already going to have access to a machine that's on the domain. Maybe you compromise one first. And whereas, with Hack the Box, usually everything's in one, right? Because you're not testing a network, you're just testing one machine. So you basically, like in Hack the Box, it's kind of unrealistic in the sense that a lot of times you have a domain controller that might be running a web server or something like that. You get initial access and you attack the same machine to get domain admin. And so without giving too much insider information, I definitely want to keep this acceptable by OffSec standards, right? What I can tell you is that you're going to have multiple machines, right? We already know this publicly. They said that there's going to be multiple machines. So most likely, there's the Active Directory domain controller is not going to be the same box that you initially exploit, right? So you're going to exploit one of these machines. It's going to be a Windows box, right? Now you're going to be doing a lot of your recon and exploitation of Active Directory from that Windows machine. So that's what shakes things up. So with Active Directory attacks, make sure that you are comfortable running the tools on Windows in order to enumerate Active Directory and exploit Active Directory. So for example, if you know how to do Kerberoasting using like Impacket or Kerberoot, stuff like that, make sure you're also comfortable doing Kerberoasting using PowerShell or some kind of tool that you can run on Windows, maybe Rubus or something like that, right? So that's what I'll say on that. That's the big difference. Metasploit framework, like I said before in the last video I did on this topic, is kind of up to you. I would recommend learning it because you are allowed to use it on one box on the OSCP, one box of your choosing. So this might be what can help come in the clutch for you or just save you some time. Now, there's definitely a lot of people that go through the exam and they don't use it at all. And you definitely don't have to use this. It's completely up to you. I would say, hey, may as well add it to your tool belt. It will definitely be very useful in the real world, depending on what you're doing. So yeah, the reason it's banned is it's such a good tool. So learn it. It's not too difficult to learn either. PowerShell Empire. This is one that I'll still stand by the fact that you don't need to learn this for OSCP. So it's a pretty cool section. I would go over it for sure. I would do all the exercises for that matter. Get the extra bonus points. Now they're 10 bonus points. But I wouldn't spend too much time learning PowerShell Empire for the exam purposes because I believe you're not allowed to use C2 frameworks as it is, and you're not going to need to use any C2 frameworks anyways. And then lastly, that's just putting all the pieces together. So yeah, that is what I would say on all of the topics on the syllabus. Now, what I wanted to add to this guide, I really wanted to make this the ultimate master guide for you guys. So I wanted to cover a little bit more than just the syllabus and stuff like I did last time, right? So obviously we have some subscriptions. We can see the pricing models at a glance, right? We talked about that before. Now, if you want to do the extended times, we could really calculate this out, right? I mean, let's say, like, at what point does Learn 1 become worth it, right? Let's calculate that. Let's hash that out here for a second. Let's run the numbers on this. Okay? Let's say that you're a complete beginner, right? I said, hey, it could be useful if you're a complete beginner. Let's assume that is the case. So if that's the case, then you're going to need to spend the $14.99. You're probably going to want that 3-month lab time, right? And then the next thing that you're going to do is, that's going to come with one exam attempt, right? If you can pass it, then you just saved yourself $1,000. So if you're really confident you're going to be able to pass it within 3-month lab time, and you have that alpha energy, go for it. I would say go for it. But if you would like a little bit more, to take the pressure off a little bit, let's just say, right? Because you could be super confident, but you just want to take the pressure off. You want to give yourself a little bit more leeway. Then, you could go for that $24.99. But at what point does that become useful? And here's the thing, right? Even if you go with the $24.99, you have to be confident you're going to pass it within 2 exam attempts, right? So if you decide to go for this and you're not able to pass it on the first try, then 2 things are going to happen. One, you're going to need a retake, and you're going to have to wait a month for that retake. So most likely, you're at least going to want an extra 30 days of lab time. So let's say you get an extra 30 days of the lab time, and let's say that, obviously you're going to need another exam attempt. You're already at $2,100 just from failing it once, extending your lab time, and doing a retake. So literally, if you would have paid like $300 more, you could have the Learn 1, right? And by the way, if you plan on taking any other offensive security cert, you're going to have to pay for that as well. So I would say if you only want OSCP, right? If you're trying to get OSCP to get your foot in the door, get your first job in this field, I think that's where it can be. I think that's where it can be worth it, right? Unlimited lab time is huge. That is, like, you can't really understate that. That's really the main selling point of this. The 2 exam attempts or whatever, honestly, it's only $200 per attempt. So if you need like 3 attempts to pass it, then that's just an additional $249. I don't see that as being a huge deal, but it depends on where you are financially. But I would say that, hey, if you fall in the camp of you need to get the OSCP so you can get a job in the field, and then you're going to put certs on the back burner for a bit after that, maybe you wait till like next year before you go for more offensive security certs, I would say, yeah, Learn 1 is probably your best bet. I would say if, on the flip side, if you are really interested in the other offensive security certs, particularly things like OSWE, OSEP, OSWA, the new one coming out, maybe even OSED, then go for Learn Unlimited. This is by far going to be your best value. You're never going to be able to get all those things for less than like $5,000. So that's where that really comes into play, I would say. Obviously, for either of these, if you can get your employer to pay for it, by far, that's where you're best served. But obviously, not everyone's in that situation. But yeah, that's just in the conservative case, right? Let's just subtract that, right? Let's say that you, instead of the 359, you need to get 2 months lab time, right? If you need to extend that by 2 months lab time, then that puts you at 2347. And let's say at that point you need another attempt. It's pretty common that it takes people 3 attempts to pass this sucker. So let's just say that's the case, then you've already paid more than Learn 1. So you may as well have went with Learn 1 at that point. Well, maybe not quite at that point, because you would, if you took 3 attempts, right, you'd have to pay the 249. But here's the big kicker: 365 days lab access. So you have that forever. And you know that could take a lot of the pressure off too. So you could really spread it out more too as well. That's something to note. Like, if you're doing this without these subscriptions, you're going to have to really go, you're going to have to go ham. No other way to say it. You're going to have to go ham in the amount of lab time you have. So if you have 3 months, you have 2 months, or even if you have 1 month especially, you're going to really have to hunker down and really be taking advantage of that lab time if you want to pass. Now, on the flip side, if you have Learn 1 or Learn Unlimited, then you can really spread it out. You can be like, put in a little bit of time each day, like maybe an hour or 2 a day, and just take, like, really spread out your exam attempts. And that's one approach you could go for, and you could still get it because you have that 365 days of lab access. So you could really wait until you're comfortable. And this is, I think, one of the big reasons they created this. The reason that a lot of people put off going for OSCP is they're like, I'm not ready. Well, if you have 365 days of lab access, you could root as many boxes as you want, spend as much time as you want in the lab, and then just wait till you're ready to schedule the exam. With that being said, don't fall into the trap where you never schedule your exam. Go for it. But I think this is an easier stepping stone for a lot of people. So I do think that Learn 1 is a really solid choice for a lot of people that fit into that category that I just mentioned. So another thing that I wanted to bring up as well would be where they talk about the path to success. They have some really interesting statistics. This is a bit of an older article now. And so particularly what I found really interesting was this infographic down here with the OSCP pass rate. This is something that might be a little bit counterintuitive. Like, how many boxes do you really need to get in the PWK to be able to pass the OSCP exam? So I remember at the time when I first took this in 2018, I mean, obviously there wasn't 70 labs back then, so maybe the metrics were a little bit different. I'm thinking they're probably about the same. I think there was about 50 boxes at the time. But I remember I rooted about 27, 28 boxes. And I thought, like, oh man, I'm so prepared because I rooted. This was me going into the exam the first time, not knowing what to expect. I was like, yeah, I'm super prepared. I got a lot of boxes. I got like more than half the boxes. I should be good to go. But if you actually look at this, this chart here, that only has like a 52% pass rate. I mean, with that being said, the odds are in your favor. But still, it is a very low percentage, right? If we were in school, a 52% would definitely be a failing grade, right? And so looking at it that way, there's a lot of room for improvement if you just do more boxes. But here is another thing that I found very interesting. Even going from the 20 to 30 range to the 30 to 40 range is only a 2% increase. But then if you go from like a 30 to 40 to a 40 to 50, you're going from 54% to 67%. Now, ideally, I'd say where you want to go, because that's still a failing grade, like based on academia, right? So I would say if you really want to give yourself a good shot to pass this thing, you need to root at least 51 machines. So that's what I recommend. Especially now, here's the thing that you should really be aware of when you're making your decision. Are you going to get one of these subscriptions, or are you going to get 60 days or just the 90 days, like one of these standalones here? This is one really important thing you want to consider. Do you want to go for the bonus points or not? This is actually a really critical decision now. It didn't used to be, but now this is like a really critical decision that you have to make, because here's the thing. Now, the bonus points are no longer with 5 points, they're worth 10 points. Out of the 70 points that you'll need to pass, the bonus points are actually worth 10 points. So if I search down here, look, 10 points will be earned for completing the lab report on all the course exercises. Here's the thing as well. Since the 2020 update, these course exercises are massive. The PDF is 858 pages worth of information and exercises and all of that. So if you even decide to go for 2 months or 3 months, you basically subtract a month from that. Trust me, I try to go super hard at this stuff. It still took me a month until I worked through the entire PDF and did all the exercises and had all that put together. Oh, and by the way, another requirement for the bonus is you have to do 10 lab machines, and at least one of them have to be an Active Directory set. So that's something that's really important to consider as well. So you're going to have to do 10 write-ups basically, and an 858 or 850 so page document of exercises. So basically subtract a month from that. And I mean, that's being a little bit conservative. It might take you longer than a month. About a month is what it took me, going fairly hard at it. So that really might beg the question, are one of these subscriptions better for you? So obviously, if you have the 365-day access, you don't have to worry, for the most part, you don't have to worry about the time aspect of it. That's pretty much eliminated. And then if that, say in the worst, bloodiest case scenario, a year goes by, you still don't have it, well, you could always just get it again and continue on, or maybe get this one, whichever one you want, and keep going, right? In a year's worth of time, $2,000 isn't what I would consider too much money. I mean, everyone is in a different financial situation, obviously, but yeah, it doesn't sound too bad to me. Now, here's the deal with this, right? So if you want to get 51 boxes, obviously that's going to take a significant amount of time. So if let's say you get 2 months lab time, well, you really only have 1 month at that point, because it's going to take you a month to do the extra credit. Now, maybe you decide you don't even care to do the extra credit and you're only going to focus on the labs, then okay, maybe in 2 months, but even still, right? So if you end up in the 50 to 60 range for 2 months, that's basically saying that you're rooting a box a day. So that's about the pace you need to go to hit this number, okay? If you get the 3 month lab time and you do the extra credit, after you finish the extra credit, you need to keep up the pace of like 1 box per day in order to give yourself a nice 74% chance or better of passing the exam. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. And that's, if that sounds intense to you, like it is, you're going to have to be working pretty crazy hours beyond whatever day job you have in order to accomplish this with the exams as they were before. And I think that's why before, when you saw videos about people passing the OSCP, they always talked about how it consumed their life and it was like all they did for that period of time, because that is what it required in order to pass. Now that these subscriptions are available, that might not be the case anymore, because you can spread out your studying now and you'll have access to the labs for a pretty significant amount of time for a year, right? So that's one of the huge changes. That is really huge. I want to also go into this. Here's some of the reviews that people wrote. You might want to check them out. Pretty cool information. Now, keep in mind, these are from older versions of OSCP, so just take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But a lot of this stuff is really important here. This is where we can jump into mindset, right? I think what they talk about here, what offensive security really hammers home all the time, is the idea of try harder. And I would say one of the best things is, I mean, everyone has their own opinions on it, but I would say if you're willing to just embrace it, it's going to help a lot. Just try harder, honestly, in the sense that, it could be a bit tongue-in-cheek, right? Like how it almost feels a bit taunting, but if you just eliminate all your emotions from it and you just look at it at face value, basically what it means is that you want to establish grit, right? You want to, like this guy's saying, grit above all else. You want to have a solid methodology. Here's where I went wrong. If you really want to know where I went wrong in the past with OSCP, here is the ultimate shortcoming that I did, right? I was too quick to fire off, to go for an exploit. I was almost too confident in finding the pathway, the vulnerability there, right? Because there's so many rabbit holes that you can encounter along the way. And you might be really confident in like, aha, I see this version here, and I see this exploit here. It should be vulnerable to this based on what I'm seeing here. And you try the exploit and it doesn't work because maybe there's some other kind of mitigation that they added that even though it should be vulnerable, technically, it's not because of some other mitigation, right? And you end up spending all this time trying to get the exploit to work, and you're like, oh, I just got to figure out the proper way to modify this to get this to work. And it turns out there's another vector that you're supposed to go for, and you never saw it because there was this additional enumeration that you didn't even do because you were so confident that you had to run the certain exploit that you found. So that is the huge thing. And what I would say is, if you get the lab, if you buy into this, you go in, you're committed, check out, they've done write-ups on a few boxes in the labs. So look at their write-ups. They're going to step you through their entire methodology. And one of the things you're going to notice with their methodology is they're often going to say that, like, we have this concrete methodology that we're going to follow no matter what. So even though we see this version here and we might be tempted, we might feel very tempted to just search for exploits for this version of the software, and we might find some stuff, we're going to postpone that for now until we do thorough enumeration. It's very, very methodical how they approach it. And that's the mindset that you're going to want to have. Just if you want some of the best information, like look at a lot of the guides and stuff that they put out. They're really solid. I'd like to cover them, feature more of them on this channel. Let me know if that's something you're interested in the comments for sure. But you see, this is definitely old information. That was when the PDF was 400 pages. Now it's over 850, I can tell you. And some of this stuff's going to be outdated, but the mindset part and the motivations are really important, right? You want to have a solid motivation for doing this as well. Like, why do you want this in the first place? Really get clear on what value could this bring to your life. I think that's going to help if motivation was ever something that you struggled with to really sit down and knock this out, right? And they talk about the struggles, the perspiration, if you will, right? And that's very true. There is a lot of grit involved, but if you have the Learn subscriptions, it can reduce a lot of that stress, a lot of that time crunch you would experience, and you could do it in a much more sustainable type of approach if that's your thing, if that was your concern before. I would say definitely it depends on what type of person you are and what you're prepared to deal with in this exam. If you're fine with, you're like, hey, I want to go through some of the grit and I want to go 10x, right? I'm a huge fan of the 10x philosophy of just going 10x into stuff. Then hey, maybe skip out on the Learn stuff, the Learn subscriptions. On the other hand, if you would rather do this without having to really sacrifice a whole lot of stuff in the short term, then maybe the Learn is better for you. So yeah, this is definitely some good insights here. I think there was like an ebook. Yeah, there's an ebook here that they put out as well. And they even give you some recommendations on how to go about this, right? And they talk more about the subscriptions that we were looking at. Adversarial mindset, right? So what are the mental models of hackers? So they talk about a lot of things we've talked about on this channel, right? So curiosity, right? Having an expertise in these domains, right? Being creative with it. And as well, having that tolerance level of, and this is something that the OSCP does a really solid job of teaching you, is how to have that mindset of, okay, if at first you don't exceed, try again, right? The try harder mentality. And you might even want to watch some of these videos here to see, like, they're more about their philosophy. I think that, hey, if you take a lot of the information straight from the source, they're giving you a lot of the right mindsets and methodologies to follow. If you really commit yourself to it and really implement it, I think that's what's going to separate you from other people, right? Most people, they try to go for shortcuts and stuff when really this exam is all about your methodology. That is one huge takeaway that I've learned from the previous attempt that I had and the labs and all that is that it's all about your methodology. That is absolutely king in this certification. It's not a test of exploitation or anything like that. They're testing that you have a concrete methodology in place, and everyone's methodology is a little bit different. But you want to make sure that you definitely err on the side of doing more enumeration than you might think you need to. Don't jump to a conclusion to try to be like, oh, I think I know what this is. Let me go and try that. You want to be very methodical in your approach, right? Maybe jumping at that exploit might have been the right path and you save yourself a little bit of time on that one machine, in that one context, in that one single scenario. But overall, and they designed the exam with this in mind, right? Overall, what's going to save you more time is sticking to your methodology, right? And this applies to the real world too. You might be on a pen test, like I said, where in some of my other videos, where it might be a network pen test where you have a subnet of, 100 IPs, right? 100 servers, and you have like 5 days or a few days to do it, right? In that case, you're not going to be able to thoroughly test everything like you're going after a hack the box machine, right? You're going to have a solid methodology in place of how do I go through all these things and prioritize and spend my time, allocate my time the most wisely for providing value on this assessment. And that's where leaning towards enumeration over exploitation is going to really come into play. But learn from failure, absolutely. Here's something they talked a lot about, and some of the other stuff that I've read from offensive security is just setting a timer for an arbitrary amount of time that you want to spend on a certain thing. And that's a huge rabbit hole strategy. I'd like to go more in depth with avoiding rabbit holes. I know I did it a long time on this channel, but I definitely learned a lot since then. And that's something I'd like to cover as well. But this is one of the tricks that you can use is set a timer, right? Use timers so that way you don't spend too much time in one area that could be a rabbit hole, right? So that's another way to do. If you are really trigger happy, right? Go ahead, you can try it, but set a timer so you're not wasting too much time in the weeds there, and you're ultimately prioritizing enumeration over exploitation. Because the more enumeration you do and the more thorough you get with that, the easier it is going to be for you to do the exploitation part, right? So yeah, if you can compromise the target, then you've succeeded. Then you can pick another machine. Yeah, so here's some strategies you can even incorporate while you're studying for this. You can even go into writing stuff down, what you learned in the process through your failed attempts. And yeah, this stuff could be helpful. I haven't done this myself, but maybe something I want to look into. Certainly, if you want to get really serious about this, just follow all the advice, So failure, most people won't do this stuff too, by the way. If you're reading this, most people won't even read this for one thing. And then out of the people that do, even fewer will actually implement this. So be one of the few that implement it. That's how you're really going to see success in your life and anything you do. So yeah, also remember that, I think this is a good point. Your failure contributes to your global progress, makes you a better cybersecurity professional. I've said this before, but so many people look at outcomes as like a binary thing rather than seeing things on a continuum. So really, if you go for OSCP and you fail it, it's not just a binary I passed or failed. Yes, it is for actually getting the certification itself, but ultimately we want to learn. We want to become better pen testers. That's the whole point of getting the certification in the first place, right? Maybe we want it for HR purposes to get our foot in the door, but ultimately we want to be good at our job. We want to be a good pen tester, right? And so all of that exists on a continuum. So if you failed the exam, there's stuff you learned along the way during that process of training up for the exam and all of that stuff. And each time you go for it and fail, there's things you learned along the way. You're getting better. You're improving with each iteration. So look at your success on a continuum rather than in a binary on or off switch, right? So remember to pause during your journey as well. Stop, take a break, go for a walk, stuff like that. I would say this is definitely really solid. I've talked about this before on my channel. Definitely a good thing to do. And they have some best practices, exam prep videos, I would recommend checking those out as well. You can get some good info straight from the source. A lot of it will be stuff that we covered here, but maybe you find some new stuff as well. And so, yeah, that's what I would say. They even have like a learning path that they created that's pretty cool to see as well. So they've selected 11 machines out of the 70 in the lab that they recommend as a learning path. So definitely take the time to read all this stuff. Most people don't read any of this stuff, if I'm being honest. Like I said, this is going to give you a lot of insight straight from the source, and that's going to enable you to be more successful ultimately, maybe even allow you to pass it on your first try. So I would say, yeah, if you're completely new especially, just follow all the recommendations to a T, develop a try-harder mindset, do these 11 boxes, do the hand-selected ones. They've went through the data, right? Obviously, they have all the access to data that we don't have, right? They can see out of the people that rooted these 11 machines, for example, they had a higher passing rate than the people that didn't root these 11 machines. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, this could have been data that they factored in when they picked these 11 machines. I'm not really sure, but obviously they have access to this data where they're probably making a very calculated, informed decision on why they're picking these 11 boxes. So this is probably where you want to start off with, right? And then, yeah, they have like these learning path machines that are going to teach you different core fundamentals that you're going to need ultimately to pass the exam. And they even list them here, and I won't spoil it here. They actually have some spoilers on these machines. Now, this one has a write-up for it, so I don't really care to show that. It's fine. But obviously, as I go down the list, that might be spoiling it for some of you. And you want to definitely avoid the forums as much as possible and avoid write-ups as much as possible as well. Even their own write-ups, if you can do it without their write-ups, then you're better off. Now, after you exploit that system, then look at their write-up. Now, they only did full-on write-ups for, I think, 2 or 3 machines on the network. So that's something to keep in mind. There's not going to be write-ups for everything. But there are a forum. There are forums, and that's where other students can write posts and ask questions and give hints on the boxes. And a lot of times these hints are pretty spoilery, right? They try to cut down on that, but a lot of it is going to... I found ultimately the main issue with relying on the forums or over-checking the forums is that it eliminates the most important aspect that offensive security that the OSCP tests, and that is developing your methodology, right? If you can see from the forums like a hint that, oh, you might want to focus on this area, on this service, or even a hint like, oh, there might be an uncommon port that's open on this box that maybe you might want to look into, wink, wink, right? Like even something like that. Now, all of a sudden, you stop looking into the web server on port 80. You spend less time looking at the SMB service, the FTP service, all that, and you're looking at this obscure port, and you're able to root the box, but that doesn't really help you for your methodology if you think about it, right? Because you knew not to spend time in these other areas. On the exam, you're not going to have that luxury. You're just going to have a ton of ports, and it's going to be up to you to enumerate everything thoroughly until you find the correct vector. So that is why you want to avoid the forums at all costs as much as possible. There might be a few scenarios here and there, especially for exercises where the forums are useful, because some of the stuff on the actual exercises, if you're going for the extra credit, some of that stuff is outdated, and the tools might require some different commands to get running that aren't in the actual PDF guide. That's where I found the forums to be really useful. Someone will post it like, hey, here's how you fix the tool and get it working. Cool. Do it then. If you already rooted the box, you want to see if there's any other ways to do it. Maybe you can check the forums then. But for the most part, I would recommend avoiding a machine. Now, maybe if you're struggling with a machine for like a week straight, and then you just go on just to see if it's a box that requires information from having exploited something else in the lab environment, okay, maybe then. But I would definitely caution you of just rushing out and checking the forums at every whim. That's going to ultimately, you're only going to be hurting yourself. You might have more boxes rooted, but you're going to be the one that gets negatively impacted by that, no one else. So just keep that in mind. You're only cheating yourself there. But yeah, that was that. They also have this philosophical approach. I think this is really cool, like talking about the mindset. Now, of course, this is an older version, but the mindsets, they're still the same, right? It's still the same. Fundamentally, it's still testing the same thing, your methodology, enumeration, all of that, right? So yeah, adopt the motto that penetration testing is a lifestyle. I think that's why it really could be a good idea to go for one of the subscriptions, right? If you want to integrate this in with your life rather than having it be something that you just go ultra hard at for like a few months and then you take a huge break. You could have, you could just go at the labs like every single day over the course of like 6 months or a year or however long you want to. And yeah, those are things you can do. Just focus on the right things as well. Talk about some closing remarks. This is a pretty short and sweet guide, but you could probably gain some insights from this. Let me just say, check out the description below. I have created the 10 most common cybersecurity pen testing interview questions guide for you guys. So especially if you're going for the OSCP as a means to get a job in the field and ultimately get employed, or even if you're looking to use the OSCP to get a higher paying job within pen testing, right? I have the 10 most common questions that I've seen. You're going to want to know how to answer these. It's really going to give you a much better chance to succeed on these interviews. So check that out, and I'll see you right over in the technical videos on the screen right now.